Welcome to Feminist Founders, a podcast that explores how to create a more equitable world through entrepreneurship. I'm your host, coach and journalist Becky Mollenkamp. Feminist Founders is a listener-funded podcast. Your contributions enable me to continue bringing you these important conversations without corporate advertising. To support the mission, head to feministfounderspodcast.com and sign up for a paid subscription. The link is in the show notes. Now, on to today's show. I'm so excited to introduce you to Caleb Thomas, one of the two men that we're having on Feminist Founders this season for first time having men on the show. He's a boudoir photographer based in Bend, Oregon. He specializes in empowering and creative boudoir sessions that help folks, particularly women, reclaim their agency, identity, and sensuality. We talk a lot about that in this episode and about TikTok and growing a big following there and what that means in his business and more, a lot around how he shows up as an ally in progress. I hope you'll enjoy this episode. And now here's Caleb Thomas. Hi, Caleb. Thank you for being here.
Hello.
I'm excited to chat. You are the second man I am having on this season. So you and I talked previously, and I've gotten to know you a bit on social media and feel really good about the way you're showing up in the world. So I'm excited to have this conversation. I think we need to have more conversations about feminism with men because nothing's going to change without y'all.
Yeah.
I start every episode by asking about your relationship with feminism, and I'm particularly interested in the answers from our men this season.
So I have always thought of myself as a feminist. I just feel like the whole idea of feminism just makes sense. I've always been kind of egalitarian too, and just the way that I think of and approach politics and everything. And so it never made sense to me why we would have all of these weird, rigid, hierarchical, exclusionary gender role things. And so even when I wouldn't have necessarily used the word or identified with it, I would probably say that I was mostly at least in thought, in a feminist. Feminism just makes sense in a world where there's 7 or 8 billion of us or whatever, and that's it. That's all we know that we've got. So it just makes sense that all people should be able to have a good life and have equal representation and protection.
That's interesting because at some point, whether it's in this part of the conversation or a separate conversation, we're going to talk about your background as a Pentecostal, as somebody who was inside of that faith, which I don't think most of us would think as being particularly progressive nor feminist. So it'll be interesting to hear about how you identified as a feminist, and yet we're also living inside of that world that feels very different. So we'll get to that. But I want to talk photography first, because that's your business, your bread and butter. You started as a wedding photographer, I think you said, and then speaking of being Pentecostal, then you went in-house at a megachurch as a photographer, and then tourism marketing. So the boudoir is only a few years old, I think. Tell me a little bit about the journey getting to boudoir and what made you decide to go that path, because the background before that, wedding maybe a little, but certainly megachurch photography and tourism photography are not, not logical lead-ins to boudoir.
I started kind of doing photography just kind of in high school. Always loved photography, always loved video making and stuff. And my best friend and I started just doing weddings, and it was weddings are not the funnest thing ever, but always my favorite part of doing weddings was the getting ready pictures when everybody's still a little at ease, and all of the anxiety and stress and everything wasn't always caught up to them. And they've got the cute little different things that are built into the whole outfits and looks and everything. That's something borrowed, that's something blue. Documenting all of that was always just super cute to me. And that's essentially what boudoir is, the getting ready part of a wedding without having to deal with the wedding. So I paid my way through college doing wedding photography, and then kind of, got burnt out on that. And then I had that offer from the Megachurch to work as their media director. And so I worked there for 5 years. I learned a lot in that and learned things that I would want to carry forward and not carry forward. And then my wife and I moved to 250 miles away, moved up to Seattle. And so I worked as the marketing director for a street sweeper manufacturer, which is wholly uninteresting. It's very hard to make a street sweeper interesting. Then we moved again to where we are now, into Bend, Oregon. and I took a job in tourism marketing. Central Oregon is known for our tourism, and it's a very beautiful location. But then the pandemic hit, and my job quickly went from, hey, this is a cool, cute place, to, hey, taco shop truck owner, you don't actually have to have your nephew come stand out front with his AR-15 to prevent OSHA from coming to enforce mask mandates. So I had kind of been getting back into photography, like portrait photography for a bit, and started gravitating towards like the more like personally expressive photography. And so I would do work with like fashion influencers and fitness influencers. And it felt really canned. Like, okay, this is what fitness influencers are expected to post on Instagram. But then we'd always do like more kind of fun stuff after that. And it always would end up, like showing like their personality and being able to express themselves and showcase their bodies that they're proud of and express, like joy and effervescence. And so I was talking to a photographer friend of mine, and she was just like, there's a name for what you're doing. She's like, well, this boudoir is what I do. Shout out to my friend Bree at Babe City Boudoir, who is an absolutely brilliant photographer. And she told me, yeah, this is a thing. This is a career path. Here's how I do it. Here's how you should do it. And so I was gradually building into that. And then I started on TikTok, as everybody did during the pandemic, and accidentally and unintentionally one day, oh, hey, 50,000 followers. Cool. Oh my goodness. They're all going and like hitting my book link on my website. Oh my goodness. I have way too much to like balance both this job and, this job that I'm gradually hating more and more. And my boss is turning to QAnon and getting more weird and awful. Hey, I could do this like full time. And so we also had our kiddo, which I was spending so much time away from him for like the first 2 years of his life that I was just missing the whole thing. We got to a point where I was just like, I can't be around this gross, conspiratorial, far right, nasty world of this small city. I wanted to be in the city that I lived in, and I'm going to quit this job. I'm booked up for the next several months. And if it doesn't go right, then I guess it doesn't go right, and we figure something else out. And my wife at that time was teaching at a school, so culinary school. So we also had a bit of a sympathy thing too. So I did it, and then that was in September of 2021, and here we are, and everything's still going good.
I want to talk a little bit more about social media, but before we do that, I feel like boudoir is so common now that people probably have an idea of what it is. But just for folks who may not know, like, what is that art form in particular? Like, what makes something boudoir versus some other type of personal photography?
Yeah. Well, I like to say that boudoir is a genre of photography that's all about empowerment, self-love, and the reclamation of your agency, identity, and sensuality. So a lot of times folks will think, okay, boudoir photography is just pictures of you in your underwear. But I like to say that boudoir is more of like an intent, the objective, more of the goal. I've had clients in everything from mechanics overalls to nothing at all. And so it's more kind of that intent of like celebrating self, celebrating and reclaiming the narrative around your body. Our society tells particularly women, your body is to service men, your body is to service the patriarchy, and you don't get to make your own identity. Boudoir kind of challenges that. No, I get to stand in my own power and stand in my own strength and stand in my own body. And you can't tell me not to.
I remember the last time we talked, you mentioned too that society hates women and women's bodies, which I wrote down because I was like, I'm guessing at least a component of what appeals to you is that part of the empowerment of the fact that this photography, again, like you said, it's an intent more than even about the outcome. The outcome's important. They want beautiful photos, but it's also about the experience itself and the way it makes women in particular feel. Is that like a big part of what makes you love this type of photography?
Definitely. I try to really like have a full like crafted experience that's like protected and pretty specific in the way that I want someone to move through this whole process. There isn't even an opportunity for anybody around them to say like, oh, this is weird. Why are you doing this? We always start with hair and makeup. Hair and makeup is included in all of my sessions. And even if it's just like wanting to sit down and get your face massaged or something, if you don't like the whole idea of like full glam makeup, I feel like that sitting down and like getting pampered is super important. I will model all of the poses that my clients get into. So I'm not going to ask somebody to do something that I have not gone through myself. Through that whole shoot process, it's, at their speed, it's at their comfort. We get real deep. We cry at least once a shoot because it's just so beautiful and powerful. And there's always this one moment that is probably why I do this, where we get a picture and I turn my camera around and show them the picture on the back of the camera, and they're like, that's me. And it's not even like oh, I didn't realize that was me, but it's like no, of course that's me. It's never like one of those, like 80s movies where the nerd takes off their glasses and then they're pretty, but it's like yeah, of course that's me. I knew that. I just didn't remember right now. That moment right there is probably the biggest reason why I do it. I think that a lot of that, kind of is rooted in like the fact that I was raised in Pentecostal world. I was working in a church, and I have a bigger body and never felt comfortable in my own body as well. And so I feel that solidarity of like throwing off the shackles of these kind of narratives that we're all told to believe about ourselves, but particularly women. There's just like something so empowering and liberating and just stunning about it.
You're taking me right where I wanted to go, because there's obviously an elephant in the room, which is you are a man photographing. Yes. I believe most of your subjects are women. I don't think you work with a lot of cishet men, if I'm not mistaken.
I think maybe a dozen total in my whole career, like a dozen.
That's a thing that I'm sure you have to confront, is I am a man photographing women in very vulnerable situations. They're usually wearing less clothing. They're trying very often to do more sensual kinds of poses. And that could be a real challenge, I would think. I hear you saying that you find some points of understanding. Obviously, you can't know what it's like to be a woman living in this world. Yeah. And I know you don't claim to. You do talk about living in a larger body, some experience with like purity culture and some of the shaming that could come inside of that. How do you go about creating safety for women in this scenario where I think women might often be, at least at the beginning, a bit nervous to say, I'm not sure if I want a man to photograph me like this, or can I get comfortable enough to let this man photograph me the way I want to be seen?
First and foremost, whenever I have someone who's even like remotely like, oh, I don't know if I would feel comfortable with a man, I'm like, okay, we won't. And I have a list. Here's 5 other like amazing women photographers that I think you should work with. I have referred probably dozens at this point of people to my photographer friends who I know that will do an amazing, empowering job and who see this work in the same way that I do. And then like through the whole shoot process, I'm just goofy. I'm lighthearted. We, do a little self-deprecation all the time. It's always fun. And I always just like aim to ensure that my identity is never utilized in a way to make any sort of power imbalance. Because there is inherently a power imbalance built into this. Because I am a cishet white man in America in the 21st century. And so along with that identity comes hundreds of years of baggage. I think that at the very least acknowledging that I'm a dude here. Like, I'm not going to feel 100% what you're feeling. I'm not going to know what this will do for you or what this won't do for you or like if anything is like triggering or anything. Because, as best as I can be, I like to be very informed about traumas and ways that men behave that are gross and upsetting. And so I try to just like keep it a place where it is never about me. And in fact, there's a quote from an ancient Spartan king. He was asked by a younger prince about the secret to having a long reign. And he said, by not putting undue importance on self-advantage. And so that's something that I always try to put into my work, is that like, I'm not doing this for self-advantage. Obviously, I want to feed this kid. So that's a big part of, like monetizing my work and like, having people pay me for it, but also at the same time, not doing it as a way to gratify myself or anything like that. And I want to be able to essentially take my position and my role and my identity as a cishet white man in America in the 21st century and cede that space that I'm granted by that identity to other folks with other voices, with other identities. Because it doesn't need to be about people like me anymore. And I think that intrinsic battle to decenter cishet white men in America in the 21st century is a battle that we're going to keep fighting.
Do you hear from clients, maybe that do decide to, that work with you, but just do you ever hear anything about the kinds of trepidation that they may have had or concerns or just anything where they're like, this, I was a little worried about this because you're a man?
I'm used to a lot more. But anymore, kind of like the people who are booking with me kind of know my vibe a bit more. But especially at the beginning, especially when I went full time, I would, as often as I could, have my wife come to the speech with me, and we always have hair and makeup people there. And so there's never a point where like, we'll just go. There's always like insurance to make people feel more comfortable about it. I like to quote Hank Green, where he said that his presence online is aggressively non-sexual. And I like to kind of go with that as well, because like it's not a sexual thing. It's an empowerment thing. It's a reclamation. And I think that once that's centered, then, folks can feel a little safer and a little less on it.
You mentioned your wife coming on shoots, and you told me before that your wife is hella feminist. And has she been part of your journey to feeling more comfort and being able to do this work in a way that feels, like you said, decidedly unsexual, but also just very like empowering for women? What kind of unlearning and learning have you had to do to feel that you can do this work in a way that honors women?
Yeah, my wife is literally one of the coolest people ever. She is just, oh my God, she's so cool. She's just the best. And she has a very feminist mom, very feminist grandma, comes from a line of these women who are just like badass and, take control and run the damn tobacco farm in North Carolina because their husband's off at war or whatever. Growing up, my mom was kind of the leader of the house as well. But that kind of, in my family, was a little more of like a role thing within like Christian culture. Whereas like my wife Devin, like her like upbringing and everything was just based on the fact that like we're here, we're doing this, like doesn't matter like that we're women in this man's world. We got to do what we got to do, and if the men are pissed about it, fuck off. Watching her move through the world has always just been like so like so badass. That's so amazing. So yeah, just like kind of witnessing that and like taking a lot of the built up like expectations of like, gender roles and identity roles and like all of these things that I didn't necessarily buy into, that like didn't necessarily think that was a requirement of me, but still like having that, in the back part of my brain, like, oh, well, that's where eventually you'll probably land in these kind of roles. But like being, in a relationship with someone who's like, no, we don't have to expect weird things out of each other. We can just talk about the thing. It was just like, okay, yeah, this is freeing and liberating. And so just like talking through the whole idea of like, okay, yeah, I will be around women who are not you in less clothing. Is that an issue for us? No. Neither of us are particularly interested in other people in any sort of romantic way. Like we feel like we hit it right this time. And so, like just that trust, that implicit, like unquestioning trust that we have with each other. Being around people of the opposite gender is not a threat. And so I think a lot of that just like security and like self-assuredness was like able to kind of give me permission to be like, okay, this is where I think I can, kind of develop my skill and develop my career and move forward in this. So I'm going to give it a shot. And she's like, oh yeah.
You work with folks of all sorts of intersecting identities, women of color, LGBTQ folks, obviously around size, maybe also disability. Have you been doing work for your own edification and also just to help your clients and to better understand your clients to learn about intersectionality and the various forms of oppression that these folks face? I'm thinking most especially probably, although I shouldn't because I think it's for all the folks you're photographing, but I certainly know that feeling of being a person in a larger body and thinking about photography and getting photographed in this way. And I know that you said as someone in a larger body, you have that understanding too. But I would imagine also for folks with disabilities or LGBTQ or anything, that there are very specific issues and challenges. And so I just wonder how you manage those things or what you're learning to be able to show up for them in a way that doesn't cause harm.
So I think what a lot of times folks will think is like, okay, I'm getting pictures. I want to make sure that I'm looking skinny, that if I have a mobility aid, I want to hide that. If I have a sensor that's on my body full time, I want to hide that. Maybe I don't want to look as dark, or can you smooth out this? I don't want my birthmark to show. But what I always challenge my clients to think of is that when we're doing this, we're not excluding parts of ourselves. We are learning to celebrate all of ourselves. And so I did a shoot with a client, and she was about to postpone because she had a heart monitor that she had to have full time on her body for a month because she was having some heart issues. And so she was like, well, it just would feel so weird about it. And I'm like, what? That's part of you right now. That's cool. And so she was like, okay, let's do it. And so we did the shoot, and her heart monitor is prominently in it. And it was one of the most beautiful things. At the image reveal session, there's one picture in particular where it's kind of the lights cascading in from the side. She's in a V-cut bodysuit. And so the heart monitor is just boom, right there, center frame. And we just she looked at it and she was like, that's not as scary as I thought it was. That's not as ugly as I thought it was. It's not as gross as I thought it was. And we just sat there and cried because it's a part of you. All of these things are a part of us. We are the sum total of everything that we are, everything that has happened to us. And those things don't have to be reflected upon badly. We can challenge those things that are oh, well, you don't want to show that. Say, fuck yes, I want to show that. Fuck yes, I want to center this. Fuck yes, I am here because of all of these things that have happened to me. I am here because of who I am. And I think that needs to be celebrated and shown, and the power that you can get out of that, the power of saying, fuck that idea of not showing my arms. Fuck that idea of saying that this birthmark is hideous. There's power in it. And there's, I don't know if you're familiar with the model Iskra Lawrence. She was, when Aerie, the American Eagle company Aerie, did their whole no airbrushing campaign in the early 2010s. She was kind of their face of that. And she did a TED Talk where she said, our insecurities make us motivated consumers. And I think that so much of our society's minor shames about body, about image, about things that are out of our control, about these things that are part of our identity is a way of serving capitalism, is a way of serving our economic system. Because if we think, okay, well, if I just get this one product, then that will make me feel more comfortable, and that will make me feel more valuable. But when you challenge that, and when you say, no, I'm good as is, then you take a lot of that power away from all of these interests that want to hold people back.
Yeah, what's it teaching you about how society or white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, what it's doing to people?
Our entire economic and social structure, is built on unjustifiable hierarchies. And so, the weird ways that manifests, just baffling so often. Like all of these different things that like somebody else would look at like a person and say, oh yeah, I don't see any flaws, quote unquote. That person sees themselves with all these flaws. So our system and our patriarchy and the heteronormativity under which we live makes everybody feel shitty about themselves. Not just people with like traditional things that, you know, society deems as unwantable. But like everybody, like nobody is exempt, from feeling all of like these pressures from society. But we're all told that everybody is exempt from feeling the pressures of the society except us. And when we feel alone, when we feel isolated, when we feel alienated from our communities, from the product of our labor, from connection with other human beings, that's when we are most susceptible and most vulnerable to negative messaging. Working with all of the amazing myriad of people that I work with has shown is just like literally everybody feels like something about them is not what society says it should be. And all of it's bullshit. And so the more that we like see that shared humanity in everybody, and God, I'm sounding like a tech bro who tried shrooms once, and realized that everybody is a human. But like, you know, the more that we see that shared humanity and see that shared struggle and see and acknowledge that we are enough, that we are valid, that everything about us is unique and amazing, and that makes us valid in and of itself, like the happier and better and more egalitarian that we'll be as a society. There's a quote by the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry. He says that if humanity is to survive, we will have learned to take a delight in the essential differences between people and different cultures. We will learn that differences in ideas and attitudes are a delight, part of life's exciting variety, not something to fear. And I think that rings so true to my work, because with the client with the heart monitor, or with I'm working in the next week and a half with a client who actually, because of the work that she has done with me and a few other photographers, is now literally a professional model who has worked for Nike and Adidas, but has her face has a birthmark all over it. And because of working with folks, she's able to like say, no, this is actually beautiful about me. Like just like knowing that all of these things that are different and what society would often deem as inferior about us are actually fucking cool. And they're super amazing, and they should all be celebrated just because we're human. Just because there's only 7 or 8 billion of us, and because we're fucking stardust that is here for a blip, and that we're that pale blue dot. And there's that astronaut who, when he was on the moon, said that seeing the Earth from the moon made me want to shake everybody and say, look at this, we're all the fucking same. In being able to really like fully celebrate and cherish all of these differences amongst all of these people that I get to work with, it just makes the experience of being human that much richer.
You do sound like you've had a good batch of shrooms, and I want some of them too,
Right.
So that's okay. I want to ask you a question that I think might be a little harder, which is, what has this work taught you as a white cis het man about your privilege, your the power that comes with that, and also the responsibility that you hold?
Yeah. So something that I always find super interesting is whenever I'm like in a group of folks and there's like majority women or you know, people of varying identities, and somebody's talking about photography, somebody will like look at me as like some sort of authority. I'm like, listen to them. They know what they're talking about. And so still in our society, there is a sense that like this cis het white man is the authority in the room, is the one who can speak with the most knowledge, with the most experience, whatever. There are experts who know way more than me. And like being in like this space with so many people of varying identities, and it's just like reinforces that like, yeah, like I'm not the default, and society thinks that I am the default, but I'm not. And so I think it just kind of keeps driving home for me that like, again, I just want to be able to cede that institutional privilege and institutional limelight to folks who don't get that just by the virtue of their identity.
Has the experience revealed to you any of your own growth edges, like areas where you still have more work to do or want to do to be a better ally?
Every client there's something that I had never even considered. There's like a new like way that they have been marginalized that I was like, never heard of that before. That sucks. If ever there is any part of me that is like reactionary in like the way that I see somebody, it makes me want to say, what? No. Remember that time that you were with that person and they said that this thing that you would never have thought was like an issue has impacted their entire life? Same for this person who's saying this thing right now. Again, to sound like the tech bro on shrooms for the first time who realized that other people are humans. Yeah, it just kind of reinforces all the time that everybody in our system has varying things that hold them back and that our society tells them are wrong about themselves. And so to just try and shake off any sort of reactionary natures that I still have. And growing up in an evangelical Pentecostal world, my brain developed in binaries. My brain developed in like blacks and whites, like the good and the bad, the heaven and the hell. And so to always like that is still my brain's default. And I think some ways that serves me. Like I have a very aggressive, okay, if some dude is creepy on the internet, bye, blocked forever kind of a policy. And so, I think like, that serves me well. But also at the same time, like a lot of times that is a huge issue. And so like challenging those reactionary natures and that binary thinking that is kind of still my default.
I think for our bonus content, so if you're not a subscriber of Feminist Founders Newsletter, go subscribe. We share bonus content there for every episode. And we're going to talk about your deconstruction of your faith in a Cliff Notes version because it's only like 5 to 7 minutes of conversation. Right. But we'll get the highlights for people to hear a little more about that. So make sure you subscribe. I want to switch to your business, the running of your business, and talk about social media specifically. Because like you said, you sort of a couple of years ago had some success with TikTok. It kind of blew up. I'm going to guess part of that was the timing, because I know during COVID, a lot of people who were adopters then had a lot of success. I'm sure some of it's subject matter, and I'm sure a lot of it is also just your personality and the way you show up. But tell me a little bit about what that experience of having a TikTok that kind of grew pretty quickly taught you about social media, and what has that experience been like for you?
I've always like looked at like YouTubers or something that had up on like 100,000 subscribers is like, oh my God, they made it. Like if you've got that, then like you're in. And so like, getting to the point where I had 100,000 followers on TikTok, now 140,000 on TikTok. It was like, oh, no. Everybody is still just an imposter at this point too. Everybody's just like trying to do their best at this point too. Nobody has this social media stuff figured out, and it's actively trying to make us not figure it out. So that way we spend more time on it and spend more frustration on it and spend more social capital on it and spend more real capital on it. And social media is inherently against anything progressive, anything like positive, and biases towards reactionary content and biases towards reactionary takes and reactionary reactions. My major in college was new media communication. So like my writing intensive course for my major was about Twitter. And so I had this Pollyanna view for a long time that like social media It's a great equalizer. Well, that's just not true in this. It is still the same classes of people that will continue to do well. And of course, there are outliers. Of course, there are people who will grow, and people who will get some sort of notoriety, but it will always end up biasing towards the same institutions and the same structures. And like, I think that also, kind of goes into a lot of things that tech bros are excited about. Like, I just watched a video about how tech bros in Europe think that they just invented the train again. And, like all of these things, like we're not going to solve big, horrifying social issues by techno-innovating our way out of it. We actually have to address the issue. So like with social media, it's not going to bring down the repressive government of Iran in the Green Revolution in 2009. It's not going to make sure that Tunisia doesn't have any sort of military dictatorship. It's not going to make sure that Black Lives Matter. Because those institutions and those systems are benefited by the existence of social media. And as much as we think that like social media can be a big, beautiful, changing force for good, which it can be, and I'm not trying to like minimize that positive potential, but like those problems will continue to exist regardless of the new innovations to the algorithm that for a month will amplify Black voices.
Well, and I think we can easily exemplify what you're saying here with the issues that you face on social media that I've seen you talking about, which is the content you're sharing. You are not sharing nude photography. You're not sharing, even if it were, ultimately, I think we need to free the nipple and it shouldn't matter. But you're showing suggestive or seductive, like if we're going to use any kind of words, I don't even think you would say titillating, honestly. Like it's just that there is these, you can see hints of the body and you can see that they're in maybe poses that feel a little more seductive. And I think from what I can tell from what you've been sharing, that you run into a lot of problems with the algorithms, or I don't even know if it's the algorithms, but like whoever is deciding what content is allowed and not allowed. While meanwhile, most of us are fighting off porn bots left and right, where it's not even remotely what you're doing. It's very clearly like, hey, come call and pay me money to see me naked. And it's very different than what you're doing. And to me, this all is very wrapped up in this idea of social media, TikTok, Instagram, all of them, they exist inside of the systems that we all exist in. They aren't fighting against those systems. They are the system, and it's replicated inside that system. So again, women's voices of folks of the global majority, queer voices, those are the voices that seem to get throttled down.
I definitely benefit from my identity. Like I mentioned earlier, Bree from Babe City Studios. He blew up on TikTok in like the beginning of the pandemic, but as a woman who celebrates women, he has been like stifled for like years at this point. And so like I've still been able to grow relatively steadily. And I think that is in a large part because this is how I did. And like, yeah, but like the throttling that happens in like right now I'm one content violation from losing my TikTok account. And I just got out of Instagram jail like 2 days ago. And I think so much of that is because my content isn't from the point of view where, ooh, look what you get to see. It's from these people are standing in their power. And so it's not like the explore page of Instagram where if you scroll far enough, you're going to see a porn bot or you're going to see someone that's like exploiting the male gaze, which like, hell yeah, get your bag, buddy. Like if you can take a bunch of internet men for a ride and get their money, I love that for you. Please do it more. But like, like the content that is more centered on that titillation or that like, oh, I get to see this. Then like that's what gets pushed more, where like the reclamation of someone's agency identity is not. And like I posted and this is nothing against either of these clients because I love them both and they're actually best friends. But like I posted a reel on Instagram with a client with a bigger body. And then I posted a reel on Instagram, very similar format because they did a besties shoot. So it was like at the same time. And she has a thinner body, and that one got a hell of a lot more views, a hell of a lot more interaction than this one did. And like, we know why. Because again, like these social media algorithms and these social media, companies and the people who run them are focused more on the getting to the spicy, the salacious, than actually like focused on people being empowered through social media. Because yeah, social media is not actually about empowering or democratizing anything. It's still about enforcing all of these different structures of power that we've formulated in our society over the last 1,000 years.
I know as a woman on social media who tries to speak about empowerment and women's rights and things like that, I know that I get a lot of really unkind things said to me by men. And this is what happens, right? When we speak up, there is this effort to try and quiet us. And a really great way to quiet women in this world that we live in is by commenting on their appearance. It's supposed to, and often does, make us feel really shamey and want to silence us, right? Because it's hard when our entire lives are spent being judged on how we look. And then when you have somebody showing up and saying, like, I actually use my voice and look what happened, I get called fat, ugly, whatever, it can make you want to silence yourself. Now, I'm curious, though, your experience, because you're showing these generally women who are in these more empowered kind of poses and feeling great about themselves, and yet you're a white cishet man who's showing those things. Are you receiving the same nasty comments that we are as women?
So only when something of mine goes viral, because nowadays, like anytime that most times that I post, it's just reaching my following, which is both great because like I have like on all of my social media outlets except for YouTube, which is a whole other thing, like over 90% women following, which is great. But when something goes viral, and when something goes viral on Instagram, the men show up, and I have just gotten to a point. I used to, like argue with people in comments. I used to, dunk on people and, call people out and, like try to make examples of them or whatever. But I've just gotten to a point where I don't think that does anything. It might feel cathartic and like give a little bit of schadenfreude at the moment. So I actually think I posted this on Threads last night. I don't think that you can block enough people on social media. I am a firm subscriber to the delete, block, and move on, which again, I think does speak to my privilege and my identity, because I do have that ability to just like, the majority of my content doesn't reach those people. I know that folks that I work with, they don't get that privilege of the majority of their stuff, like just not reaching those gross people. So I do recognize that isn't always possible for everybody. But I welcome the conversation about like my place in all of this, because I think that's a very important conversation to have. But just if it's dumb and name calling and from a man or from, conservative, just like it's not worth anybody's time. It's not going to amount to anything. So for everybody's
sanity, that might be a nice question for us to end this main part of the interview on, which is, what is your place in all of this?
I like to think that I shouldn't necessarily have a place. That like, again, that I am able to cede that institutional privilege and power to other people, so that other people can use the things that were given to me by the merit of me being born as a cishet white dude in the 21st century in America. I'd like to just give that up to other people, because I don't need it. I don't need to be the center of things. I don't need to be celebrated. All I really need out of this is just to be able to feed my kid and pay rent. Other than that, like, I don't really need to have a place in all this.
I'm only going to push back gently to say,
Okay. Uh-huh.
Your place, I think, is around responsibility. So it is about what is your responsibility as a white cishet
Mm-hmm.
man to be a part of changing these systems from which you
Yeah.
benefit, from which
Yeah.
your people have built and that you benefit, right? And so
Yeah.
thinking about that and what does that look like for you? And obviously some of that is in the
Yeah.
way that you're showing up in your work and online and marketing and in your own home. So I think you're
Mm-hmm.
doing a lot of it, but I think that to me, your role isn't obviously it's not at the center, but it's not also to abdicate any role at all. Like there is a role,
Right.
and it is
Yes.
what's the
Yes.
responsibility for change.
Yeah. That if I were to say that, it would be, yeah, to continue to emphasize that, like, we're not the center of this. We don't need to be. And like toxic masculinity and like toxic whiteness, like, that hurts us. So, we don't need to live like that. We don't need to put that on ourselves. And I think that we do is just bad.
You and I both have young sons, and so I
Mm-hmm.
think that especially yours is a few years behind mine when they get into
Mm-hmm.
school and they start developing friendships, and you start to see how much the world outside of what goes inside of your own home, what goes on inside your own
Mm-hmm.
home, the world outside of that has such an effect also. And that you
Yeah.
begin to see the way that white supremacist, heteronormative patriarchy gets its claws into men
Yeah.
as boys. Even when you fight against it, you can have the most feminist parents and still see them coming home and say like, oh, society really does its part. And
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard because you do see that this isn't just harmful, like you said, to women. It's harmful to boys. Watching a boy starting to get the message he can't have feelings is painful. It's
Yeah.
awful. So your son's lucky to have
Well,
you,
and
but
that is like a discussion that we've had, like living in a state that was constitutionally whites only. Um, the reason that Oregon joined the Union as a free state was not because it was against slavery. It's because Oregon did not want black people in it, period, even if they were enslaved. Um, and then living in an area of the state that is still predominantly rural and predominantly conservative, and a, 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 a white enclave, like knowing that like we're sending our kid to like a world where he will not meet many diverse people until we like go elsewhere. And, luckily he's got lots of diverse family members. So that's always good. But like, we've definitely had discussions like, oh God, are we doing the right thing by even living here still?
well, and also remember that we all live in these systems and it's
Well,
not just, I mean, our individual actions matter a lot and these systems exist everywhere. So it doesn't really matter where you are in the US. Yes, there
exactly.
are places where it's more extreme or perhaps just more vocal and less other places, but we're all in the same systems. And that's like globally pretty much. Like, white supremacist heteronormative patriarchal capitalism is pretty much the globe now. So there's not a lot of
Yeah.
escaping it, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know, I just say that to like you do what you can. And we also
Yeah,
have to free
exactly.
ourselves to some degree to say, I can only do what I can do. Because my whole point is
Yeah.
we're doing all we can in our home and your kid goes off and you start to say like, oh my God, there's this world that's going to help shape him no matter how
Yeah.
much I don't want it to. And it's hard and it does harm boys. And so thank you for the work you're doing because I think it's really valuable for helping to change some of that narrative, because again, your role is the responsibility piece of speaking up, of pushing back, of challenging what others are saying or the way they're showing up. And so I've seen you doing it online. I know you are. And so thank you. To end this portion of the interview, I just ask, is there a nonprofit or an organization that's doing good work in the world that you support that you'd like to shine the light on?
I am a huge supporter of the Bend Pride Coalition. We live in a very conservative area where a lot of folks are pretty anti-LGBTQI plus. So they do really good work in not just supporting the queer community in the city of Bend, but also in a lot of the more rural cities around us, where it's even more conservative and even more reactionary, even more against the LGBTQI plus community. I
I,
love the work that they do, and they are amazing.
like so many folks, I think of Oregon as Portland. And so you forget that much of Oregon is not as progressive as Portland. And so thank you for that reminder and to
Yeah,
support what's happening in Bend to try and protect all folks who maybe are not getting that safety in that area. So thank you for that. And thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. And again,
of course,
go subscribe to the newsletter, because we're going to have a great little conversation about some of the things you've hinted at throughout this that I have a feeling really affect how you see the world, which is your experience of being in the evangelical Pentecostal faith for a long time. So we're going to go talk about that now. And thank you again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Feminist Founders Podcast. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, or if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing with the show, please visit feministfounderspodcast.com. There you can find out about becoming a paid subscriber for as little as the price of 1 cup of coffee a month, which will directly support my work. Thanks again, and I can't wait for our next episode.